One of the things that Cernan and Schmidt had to deal with was that Cernan accidentally broke one of the fenders off the rover, the rear fender, right rear fender, with his geology hammer, which was kind of sticking out of a pocket of his suit, and it snagged on the fender as he walked around the rover and pulled it right off. Well, in Houston, the Fix-It guys got together and they figured out that they could make a repair using geology maps that they no longer needed, and duct tape, which of course any good space mission must have on board, and a couple of clamps from the lunar module cabin that were normally used to hold up some utility lights that they could do without. And so they brought all this stuff outside with them. They'd already put together the maps and the tape inside. It'd be pretty hard to do that out on the surface with the pressurized gloves, and not to mention all that dust. So they brought that out, they clamped it on the fender, it worked like a charm. Now on EVA-2, the big news was at Shorty Crater, where Jack Schmitt was approaching a big boulder, and as he walked over to the boulder, he looked down at his feet and he saw, for the first time on any Apollo mission, a vivid color on the moon, actually orange. And Schmitt had discovered a deposit of orange soil, not the usual gray and tan and white and black materials, but just vivid orange. Not the picture doesn't even convey how vivid orange it was in that bright lunar sunlight. Kind of like the way a stop sign glows in the glare of your headlights. The soil glowed in that sunlight, and in fact, it was made of glass beads, volcanic glass, tiny little beads of glass, rich in titanium oxide, that it turns out had erupted onto the moon millions of years ago, or billions of years ago, I should say, in a fire fountain, much like you see in Hawaii coming up from the big volcanoes there. This was billions of years ago, though, and then it got buried and then re-exhumed by a more recent impact a few million years ago that formed Shorty. And so Shorty acted as an excavation into that deeper material that was much older and brought it to the surface. And they actually were able to grab a bunch of that. They did a core tube sample. They got some very black material as well, black glass, which turned out to be the explanation for why the floor of the Taurus-Littrow Valley is so dark. It has this black glass mixed in with it. Now later, Ron Evans in lunar orbit was able to discover other patches of orange in other locations once he had been tipped off by the surface guys that it was there. He was able to find it in other places. So it turns out to be a very fascinating and rare discovery from Apollo. EVA-3, the final moonwalk of Apollo, and so far the final moonwalk in history, took place mostly on the flanks of the North Massif. And these TV images show some of the work that Cernan and Schmitt did at a collection of very large boulders that had rolled down the slope of the North Massif about 100,000 years ago and come to rest near the bottom of the mountain. And that was a big breccia that had been created in the impact that formed the vast Sea of Serenity. And so a wonderful little geologic tableau, a history book. And because you had a professional geologist there, Schmitt was able to do a thorough investigation. And of course, Cernan was a terrific field partner for Schmitt. He did a superb job to complement Schmidt's level of detail. Cernan had more of a big picture overview of what they were doing, what they were seeing. And all of the pilots who went to the moon did superb jobs on these last three missions as field geologists with the good help of the geologists on Earth. And then it was time to leave the moon, and thanks to the rover's TV camera, we were actually able to see it happen. So let's take a look at that video.
10 seconds, 10 seconds. Fourth stage, push. Engine arm is in. Okay, I'm going to get the pro. 99, proceeded. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good. Ag thought. Pitch over. Roger, you have good thrust.
And with that, the final team of lunar explorers left the moon and headed for lunar orbit to rejoin their comrade Ron Evans. Well, on the way back to Earth, just as Al Worden and Ken Mattingly had done on the preceding two missions, Ron Evans took the Trans-Earth EVA halfway between the moon and the Earth to retrieve those canisters of scientific film. Here you see a frame from a motion picture film that shows Evans holding on to a couple of handrails on the side of the service module and just surrounded by the abyss of deep space. And what an impression that blackness made on all the guys that did these EVAs. On the lower left part of the picture, you can see Jack Schmidt's arm as he holds the umbilical and keeps it from getting caught on anything. So here's a glimpse of that 2001 experience that the command module pilots and the lunar module pilots had on the way home from the moon. Well, finally, Apollo 17 splashdown in the Pacific. Here's a shot looking directly from overhead from one of the helicopters at the moment of splashdown, bringing Apollo to an end. One of the great adventures in human history, and certainly still the highlight of what the space program has done so far. And so that wraps up this week. I'm Andy Chaikin. We'll see you next week.